This matrix represents birthing parents. The high contrast figure highlights a precise epidemiological reality. 1 in 7 experiences postpartum depression. This ratio scales to millions of patients navigating a severe, debilitating medical condition, not a temporary emotional fluctuation. The presentation often defies standard assumptions of sadness. Patients frequently report profound isolation and a distinct emotional void, sometimes describing an inability to feel anything at all. Effectively treating this condition requires abandoning the misconception that severe emotional distress is a normal, expected component of the postpartum period. This graph tracks postpartum symptom severity. The initial spike, the baby blues, returns to 0 at 2 weeks. Postpartum depression bypasses this mark. It persists and deepens across the first 12 months. Its onset is unpredictable, emerging at any point within that first year. Relying strictly on a short-term observational window leaves a patient highly vulnerable to a long-term, escalating illness. Restructuring the timeline of postpartum risk assessment is the mandatory first step in architecting an effective clinical safety net. The inward clinical markers of this pathology include persistent numbness, severe difficulty bonding with the newborn, and intrusive thoughts concerning harm. Outwardly, a patient might suddenly stop responding to text messages or present with a total flat affect, entirely devoid of physical micromovements around the infant. Severe sleep disruption is another critical indicator, specifically when the patient remains unable to sleep even when the infant's schedule permits it. These symptoms represent the physical presentation of a treatable medical pathology. They are entirely disconnected from a person's capacity or desire to be a capable parent. The standard of care relies heavily on proven clinical interventions, specifically interpersonal therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. These therapeutic frameworks are regularly integrated with medication protocols, many of which are completely safe for breastfeeding parents. Accurate clinical recognition paired with these evidence-based therapies transitions a patient from a prolonged crisis state into a manageable recovery. This timeline illustrates the standard maternal care model, anchored by a single, isolated checkup exactly at the 6-week mark. Given the variable 12-month onset of the condition, relying on this single data point leaves 10.5 months as a completely unmonitored danger zone. The structural solution requires utilizing the existing high-frequency schedule of pediatric well visits. These pediatric intervals naturally intersect the parent repeatedly throughout that critical first year, covering the exact window of highest risk. Executing this requires deploying validated clinical screening tools during those visits, specifically the EPDS and PHQ-9 questionnaires. These tools do not serve as a final diagnosis. Rather, they act as the necessary tripwire, triggering a formal evaluation by a licensed clinician. Shifting the screening responsibility from an isolated obstetric visit to continuous pediatric touchpoints closes a severe gap in maternal health care. Identifying the pathology is only half the equation. An accurate diagnosis yields 0 clinical value if the required intervention remains entirely inaccessible to the patient. New parents operate under severe physical and logistical constraints, heavily restricted by travel limitations and immediate childcare deficits. Attempting to align a standard 60-minute in-office clinic visit with the highly erratic schedule of a newborn creates a nearly insurmountable temporal barrier. Add to this the financial friction of high specialist copays or out-of-network providers, and the prescribed treatment becomes functionally impossible to obtain. Telehealth architecture provides the exact structural mechanism required to bypass these physical and temporal barriers entirely. A theoretically perfect clinical pathway will always fail the patient if the logistical delivery system ignores the daily realities of early parenthood. Coping and healing counseling operates as a primary example of this optimized zero-barrier delivery model. Systemic impact requires significant operational scale. This map of Georgia shows their border-to-border geographic coverage across all 159 counties. Supplying that network requires a diverse, culturally competent clinical team, staffed entirely by licensed specialists, including clinical social workers, professional counselors, and marriage and family therapists. Notice the financial architecture that ensures true access. Medicaid patients incur a $0 copay, while commercial plans range from $10 to $40 per session. The ultimate operational metric of the system is same-week maternal intake, allowing a patient to receive fully licensed care right from their home while the infant takes a nap. By decoupling the clinical team from a physical building and neutralizing cost, telehealth models effectively engineer a frictionless pathway to recovery. When we return to the 12-month timeline, we see how the two halves of the solution integrate. Continuous screening connects directly to immediate intervention, creating a locked closed-loop network. The data proves that postpartum depression is highly treatable when the medical system physically aligns with the patient's reality. Practitioners must utilize integrated platforms like CHC Therapy at chctherapy.com or 404-832-0102 to immediately refer patients and close the gap. Postpartum intervention is no longer constrained by the limits of a single 6-week visit. The condition is solved through continuous clinical vigilance and accessible architectural design.